Hey, welcome back to another episode of Lit Talk with Lisa. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're tuning in on your morning walk, stuck in traffic, winding down after a long day, or maybe just hiding from your to-do list with a podcast break, no judgment. This is your little pocket of cozy conversation about books that don't just sit on a shelf, but actually live with us, you know? Books that nudge us, shape us, maybe even annoy us at first, and then quietly rearrange the way we see the world. So today, oh my gosh, I've been looking forward to this one. We are diving into a true classic. And when I say classic, I don't mean like the Shakespeare play you had to read in high school classic. I mean one of those rare books that has been floating around for almost a century now, changing lives, sneaking its way into boardrooms and classrooms and coffee chats. I'm talking about How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. But before I even get into the book, let me tell you a quick little story. This happened to me a few years ago. I was at this networking event. You know the kind, where everyone's holding those awkward plastic cups of wine and pretending to look fascinated by the snack table just so they don't have to make eye contact? Yeah, that vibe. So I walk in, and immediately I feel that knot in my stomach. Who do I talk to? How do I break into these little circles of people who already seem deep in conversation? And my brain is just yelling, "Don't be weird, don't be weird, don't be weird." Anyway, I finally muster the courage to join this small group. And there's this one guy, let's call him Greg. Now, Greg was doing everything wrong. Like if Dale Carnegie had been standing there, he would have fainted on the spot. Greg spent the entire time talking about himself. His job, his recent promotion, his marathon training, his trip to Italy. And every time someone else tried to jump in, he just circled it back to himself. By the end, I remember thinking, wow, I literally never want to see this man again. And then, get this, the woman standing next to me, who had barely said a word, leaned over after he left and asked me about me. Like, she asked where I was from, what kind of work I did, what I was passionate about. And she actually listened. And by the end of that 5-minute conversation, I liked her a whole lot more than Greg, and I actually wanted to stay in touch. That, my friends, is Dale Carnegie in action, even if she never read the book. It's this idea that how we make people feel matters so much more than the dazzling stories we tell about ourselves. Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. How to Win Friends and Influence People was first published in 1936. Yep, nearly 90 years ago. But here's what blows my mind. Despite the world changing in insane ways since then, like Carnegie didn't even know what TikTok was, he never slid into a DM, he never had to mute a Zoom call, his advice is still, honestly, shockingly relevant. Because at the core, human beings haven't changed that much. We still want to feel seen, heard, respected, and, let's be real, we want people to like us. Now, I know some folks hear that title and they're like, ugh, How to Win Friends and Influence People? That sounds manipulative, like some sleazy business seminar. And yeah, I get that vibe. It sounds like you're trying to trick people into being your friend. But here's the thing. Once you crack open the book, you realize it's not about manipulation at all. It's about genuine human connection. Carnegie's whole deal is that if you shift the focus off yourself and onto others, if you start caring more than you're used to, then relationships just work better. And that applies whether you're a CEO, a teacher, a parent, or just someone trying to not be Greg at a party. So let's dip our toes into the first big ideas Carnegie lays out, and he actually starts with what he calls fundamental techniques in handling people, which is basically like, okay, before you even get fancy, here are the baseline rules of not being insufferable. The very first principle is, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Now that sounds simple, right? Like, duh, don't be mean. But think about how often we do it without even realizing. You're at work, your coworker makes a mistake, and your instinct is to be like, seriously, how did you mess this up? Or you're at home and your partner loads the dishwasher in that insane way where all the bowls are stacked on top of each other, and you just can't resist saying something snarky. Carnegie's point is this. When you criticize someone, even if you're technically right, you make them defensive. Nobody's like, thank you so much for pointing out how I failed. I feel closer to you now. Nope. They shut down, they resent you, or they quietly start planning their revenge. Okay, maybe not revenge, but you know what I mean. Instead, if you really want to influence someone, the move is to understand them. Try to see why they did what they did. Maybe your coworker messed up because they didn't have the right info. Maybe your partner is stacking bowls that way because that's literally how they grew up doing it. Doesn't mean you have to silently suffer with the crooked bowls forever, but it does mean approaching it with curiosity instead of condemnation. And here's a little confession. When I first read this, I was like, oh no, this is me. I complain all the time. Like, I'm the person who will complain about the line at the coffee shop being too long, or the Wi-Fi being too slow, or the neighbor's dog barking at 7 a.m. But Carnegie kind of nudged me into noticing how pointless that is. Complaining doesn't fix anything. It just spreads bad vibes. And honestly, people don't remember the specifics of your complaint. They just remember that you're kind of a drag to be around. Okay, so that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, and this is one of my favorites, is give honest, sincere appreciation. And let's pause on that word sincere because this is not about flattery. It's not like, oh, nice tie, boss, when you don't even like the tie. Carnegie is very clear. People can smell fake compliments a mile away. What he's talking about is noticing real things people do and giving them credit for it. I'll tell you, one time I had this teacher who completely changed the way I saw this in action. It was in college, and she had this habit. At the end of class, she would pick out 1 or 2 students and say something specific like, I love the way you phrased that question today. It made everyone think. Or, your example really helped clarify the reading. And you could just see the way people's faces lit up. It wasn't generic praise. It was targeted, thoughtful. And people worked harder in her class, not because she demanded it, but because she appreciated it. Imagine if we all did that more often. Just looked around and found those small, genuine things to call out in people. Like telling your friend, hey, I really admire how you handled that stressful situation. Or telling your kid, I noticed how kind you were to your classmate. That sticks with people way longer than you think. And then, Carnegie's third big principle in this opening section is arouse in the other person an eager want. Now, this one sounds a little salesy at first, but it's actually super profound. Basically, he's saying, if you want someone to do something, don't frame it in terms of what you want. Frame it in terms of what they want. Like, if you're trying to get your kid to eat vegetables, you don't say, because I said so. You tie it to their desire, like, hey, eating broccoli will make you strong enough to beat me at arm wrestling. Or in a workplace setting, instead of telling an employee, stay late because we need these numbers, you say, if we finish this tonight, we'll all be able to walk into tomorrow's meeting confident and ahead of the game. It's subtle, but it's about aligning their goals with yours. And this is such a game changer because we're all naturally tuned to the radio station Whiskey FM. What's in it for me? Carnegie didn't use that exact phrase, but that's the idea. If you can tap into what the other person cares about, suddenly you're not pushing against resistance, you're pulling in the same direction. And this is where things get really fun because once you've got those fundamental techniques down, like, avoiding criticism, giving appreciation, and tuning into what people actually want, Carnegie shifts into this next big area, how to actually make people like you. Not in that fake smile and nod way, but in that, I feel good when I'm around this person way. And honestly, when you think about it, isn't that what we all secretly want? So, one of the first big lessons in this part of the book, and it's so deceptively simple, you almost roll your eyes at it, is become genuinely interested in other people. Like, just actually care. And okay, I know what you might be thinking. Sure, Lisa, that sounds obvious. Of course you're supposed to care about other people. But here's the thing. Most of us, if we're brutally honest, we spend about 90% of our mental energy caring about ourselves. Like right now, as you're listening, part of your brain is probably still wondering what you're going to have for lunch, or if you remembered to answer that text, or whether you sounded weird in that meeting earlier. That's just how we're wired. We're the stars of our own little internal movie. Carnegie's point is, if you can actually turn down the volume on your own ego for a bit and crank up the curiosity dial about other people, you immediately stand out. because it's rare. Most people don't do it. And when someone feels like you really want to know about them, what excites them, what annoys them, what they're dreaming about, they light up, they feel important, and that creates this magnetic pull toward you. Let me give you a real life example of this. So a while ago, I had this barista I saw every morning at my local coffee shop. I'd shuffle in, half asleep, order my latte, smile politely, and then zone out while they made it. Like, it was the same script every single day. Then one morning, for some reason, I actually asked him, "Hey, how's your morning going? Is it super busy for you guys right now?" And you know what? His whole demeanor changed. He looked kind of surprised. Then he started telling me how they'd just gotten a new espresso machine and everyone was learning to use it, and how he actually liked the morning rush because it made the time fly. Suddenly, we were chatting like actual humans, not just coffee robot and customer. From then on, every time I came in, we'd have these little conversations. And honestly, it made my mornings better. And I could tell it made his mornings better too, because he wasn't just another background character in my day. He was someone I cared about. That's the magic of genuine interest. And Carnegie really stresses that word. Genuine. This isn't about pretending to be interested while secretly waiting for your turn to talk. People can sniff that out a mile away. It's about actually leaning in, asking questions, remembering details, and caring enough to follow up later. And the ripple effect is wild. Think about someone you know who's like that. Someone who always asks you about you. Don't you kind of love being around them? Don't you think of them as one of your favorite people, even if they barely talk about themselves? That's the power Carnegie is pointing to. And here's a little side note. I think this is especially relevant now in our phone-addicted, scroll-heavy world. Because let's be real, most of us are half distracted all the time. We're listening with one ear while we're mentally drafting an email. So when someone actually gives you their full attention, it feels like water in the desert. It feels rare, and therefore precious. Okay, so that's the first big make people like you lesson. But Carnegie doesn't stop there. Another one that ties in beautifully, and honestly, it's one of my absolute favorites, is this. Remember that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest sound in any language. And okay, when I first read that, I kind of laughed. Like, really? The sweetest sound? That feels a little dramatic. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Because it's not just a label, it's your identity. It's your story. It's the word that has followed you since birth, the one your parents whispered, the one teachers called in class, the one friends shout across a crowded room. When someone remembers it, it tells you they see you as an individual, not just some interchangeable extra in their life. I'll give you an example. I used to go to this yoga class pretty regularly, and the instructor was one of those people who taught like 100 students a week. Tons of faces, tons of names. I didn't expect her to remember mine at all. But one day, as I was rolling up my mat, she said, "Nice work today, Lisa." And I swear, I was grinning like a kid who just got a gold star. It was such a tiny thing, but it made me feel like I mattered. Like I wasn't just mat number 27 in the back row. On the flip side, we all know how it feels when someone forgets our name, especially if it's someone we've met multiple times. You feel invisible, like you didn't make enough of an impression to be worth remembering. And it stings. Even if you tell yourself it's not personal, it kind of is. So Carnegie's advice here is, make the effort. Learn people's names, use them, say them warmly, and if you forget, because, let's be real, it happens, be honest and ask again. People are way more forgiving if you admit, "I'm so sorry I forgot your name. Can you remind me?" than if you just avoid it forever. I actually started a little trick because of this. Whenever I meet someone new, I repeat their name back right away. Like, if they say, "Hi, I'm Sarah," I'll say, "Hi, Sarah, nice to meet you." That way it sticks a little better. And sometimes I'll even jot it down later, like met Sarah at the bookstore, loves mystery novels. That way, next time I see her, I can not only remember her name, but also ask, "Hey, Sarah, read any good mysteries lately?" And boom, you've just elevated a casual connection into something warmer. Now, I know some people hear this and think, okay, but isn't that kind of cheesy? Like, am I just buttering people up by using their names all the time? And the answer is no. not if it's natural. Don't go overboard. Don't turn every sentence into, well, Sarah, what do you think about this, Sarah? I'd love your opinion, Sarah. That's just creepy. But sprinkling someone's name into a conversation here and there is one of those subtle cues that says, I see you. You're not just background noise. And honestly, think about the people you admire most in your life. Chances are, they make you feel special. They make you feel seen. And often, that starts with something as small as remembering and using your name. So put those two together, the genuine interest in people and the respect of remembering their names, and you've already got a recipe for being the kind of person others are drawn to. It's not about charm school tricks. It's not about mastering the perfect witty line. It's about tuning into the basics of human nature. People want to be noticed. They want to feel valued. And if you can give them that, you're already ahead of the game. And, I think what's so refreshing about Carnegie's approach here is that it's not flashy. It's not go out there and dominate the conversation or impress people with your brilliance. It's the opposite. It's step back, listen, notice, remember. And in a world where everyone is trying to shout over each other, that quiet attentiveness is like a superpower. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I read stuff like this, I get this itch to try it out in real life. Almost like a social experiment. Like, what if I go through my whole week deliberately paying more attention to people's stories and remembering their names? What happens? And every single time I do, I'm reminded how powerful it is. People soften, walls come down, conversations feel easier, and you realize, oh, wow, this isn't just some self-help gimmick. This is how human beings are wired. And that, honestly, is just scratching the surface of this make people like you section. Carnegie has a handful of other gems lined up, each one kind of building on the last. But I want to save those for the next part of our journey together, because they deserve their own space, their own stories, their own little experiments you can play with in your daily life. And here's where things get even juicier, because after talking about the power of showing genuine interest in people and remembering their names, Carnegie slips in another principle that sounds almost too obvious to matter. But when you really sit with it, it's like, oh, this is the glue that holds conversations together. He says, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Now, I know, at first glance, that doesn't sound revolutionary. Like, of course, you're supposed to listen when someone's talking, right? But think about the last conversation you had. Were you really listening? Or were you just waiting for your turn? Because most of us, if we're being brutally honest, fall into the latter camp. We're nodding, we're smiling, but inside our brain is racing with, okay, when they stop, I'll tell my story. Oh, that reminds me of the time and then boom, we've hijacked the conversation. Carnegie's point here is simple but profound. If you can actually flip that instinct, if you can really sit back and give people the stage to talk about themselves, they will walk away feeling like you're the most fascinating person they've ever met, even if you barely said 2 sentences. And I have a story about this. So I once went on this first date, oh boy, and I was kind of nervous, but I told myself, okay, Lisa, just channel your inner Dale Carnegie. Be curious. So I started asking him about his work, his family, his hobbies, and he talked and talked and talked. I mean, I barely got a word in. And I'm not exaggerating. By the end of the night, I think I had shared maybe one story about my cat, and that was it. But here's the funny part. As we were saying goodbye, he looked at me with this big smile and said, wow, you're such an amazing conversationalist. I feel like we really clicked. And I almost laughed out loud because what? I hadn't really talked, but that's exactly Carnegie's principle at work. He got to do his favorite thing, talk about himself. And so in his mind, the evening was a smashing success. Now, was there a second date? No, because listening is great, but you also want some balance. But still, it was such a real-life demonstration of this rule. And it makes sense when you zoom out. Because for most people, their favorite topic, the thing they're most fluent in, the thing they never get bored of, is themselves. Their own experiences, their own opinions, their own stories. It's like their personal Netflix series that they never stop streaming. So when you step into the role of an attentive audience, you're giving them a gift. You're saying, hey, your story matters here. And the trick is, it can't just be passive listening. Carnegie isn't saying just nod and zone out. He's saying be engaged. Ask follow-up questions. Notice little details and circle back to them. If someone tells you they just got into gardening, don't just go cool. Ask what they're growing. Ask if they've killed any plants yet. Ask if they've discovered the magic of basil that actually survives more than 3 weeks. That's when people feel like you're not just politely tolerating them, you're actually interested. I remember once chatting with this older neighbor of mine, a sweet retired guy who, honestly, I never thought I had much in common with. But one day I asked him casually about his dog, this huge golden retriever who always lounged in their yard. Well, that opened the floodgates. Turns out he used to train service dogs for veterans. He started telling me all these stories about the training process, the challenges, the incredible matches he'd seen between dogs and their humans. And you know what? I was riveted. I would never have guessed that this quiet man had this whole world of stories. And afterward, he always waved at me with this big grin, like we had a bond. And all I had really done was ask and listen. It reminds me of that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And listening is one of the clearest signals of caring. It says, I value your words enough to give them my time. And honestly, in our world, where everyone's scrolling and half distracted, giving someone your full attention is like offering them pure gold. Now, Carnegie also slips in another piece of magic here, which is closely tied to listening. He says, talk in terms of the other person's interests. This one is subtle but powerful. Basically, if you want to keep someone engaged, connect what you're saying to what they already care about. Think of it like this. Everyone has their own radio station, tuned to what matters to me right now. If you're broadcasting on a totally different channel, they'll tune you out. But if you can line up your conversation with what's already on their frequency, suddenly you've got their full attention. For example, I once had this colleague who was obsessed with baseball. Every Monday morning, he'd come in talking about stats and plays from the weekend. Now, I couldn't care less about baseball. I don't know the difference between a shortstop and a long stop. Is that even a thing? Probably not. But I noticed how fired up he got whenever the topic came up. So one day, I asked him to explain something simple to me. Like, hey, I never really understood how batting averages work. Can you explain it? And oh my gosh, his face lit up. He gave me this whole animated breakdown, using examples, scribbling numbers on a napkin. And you know what? Well, even though I didn't walk away a baseball fan, I walked away with a better connection to him. Because I had stepped into his world for a few minutes. And that's the trick. You don't have to fake being deeply passionate about something you're not. But showing curiosity about what they care about, that's magnetic. And I think we've all had the opposite experience too. Like when you're excitedly telling someone about a hobby, say, your new sourdough starter, and you can see their eyes glaze over because they just don't care. It feels deflating, right? Like, oh, I guess I'm boring them. But when someone actually leans in and says, wait, how do you even keep a sourdough starter alive? Doesn't it smell weird? You're suddenly alive again. You're like, yes, let me tell you all about my weird flour and water pet. So Carnegie's principle here is really about generosity. And you're giving someone the gift of being seen in their passions. And in return, they feel warmer toward you, they open up, and boom, you've got the seeds of a genuine friendship or connection. And here's something that's easy to overlook. None of this takes huge effort. It's not about rehearsing clever lines or reinventing your personality. It's about shifting your focus, listening instead of talking, asking instead of telling, tuning into what excites the other person instead of only broadcasting your own station. It's tiny adjustments, but they create massive ripple effects. I think that's why this book has lasted so long, because none of these ideas rely on technology or trends. They're just human. They're timeless. People wanted to be listened to in 1936, and guess what? They still want to be listened to in 2025. So the next time you're at a party, or on a date, or even just chatting with your barista, maybe experiment with this. Ask more questions than you answer. Notice when someone's eyes light up at a topic and ride that wave with them. You might be surprised how much closer you feel to someone in just a few minutes. The more I sit with this book, the more I realize it isn't really about winning friends at all, not in the competitive sense of the word. It's not like you're out here collecting people like baseball cards or trying to rack up points in some popularity contest. What Dale Carnegie is really nudging us toward is this deeper, gentler truth. Human connection is an art, and it's an art that thrives when you shift the spotlight off yourself and shine it, even just a little, on the people around you. I mean, think about it. How often do we walk through our days so wrapped up in our own little bubble, our to-do lists, our frustrations, our anxieties, and then someone comes along who actually listens, who remembers your name, who asks about your dog or your weekend project, who laughs at your stories and means it. And suddenly you feel lighter. You feel important. You feel, in this tiny but profound way, loved. That's what Carnegie is pointing us toward. Not manipulation, not charm tricks, not some sneaky formula, just the basics of kindness and attention, stuff we know in our bones but forget to practice when life gets noisy. And honestly, when I think about the moments in my own life that stand out, it's never the times when someone dazzled me with their brilliance. It's the small things. The friend who remembered to check in on me after a rough week. The coworker who said thank you for something that usually goes unnoticed. The stranger at the grocery store who cracked a silly joke and made me laugh. Those are the things that stick, the little anchors of humanity we cling to without even realizing it. Carnegie just packaged those truths in a way that we can actually act on. Like, don't criticize, show appreciation, be genuinely curious, listen more than you talk, use people's names. It's not rocket science, but when you weave it all together, it kind of becomes rocket fuel for relationships. And here's the wild part. When you practice these things, your world actually changes shape. People respond differently to you. Opportunities open up. Conversations feel smoother. Conflicts don't escalate the way they used to. It's like suddenly you're walking around with this quiet little superpower, not because you've learned how to influence people in the slimy sense, but because you've learned how to make them feel good in your presence. And when people feel good around you, everything else flows. For me, reading this book, and honestly, rereading it over the years, has been a constant reminder that the tiniest tweaks in how we show up can make the biggest difference. And I'll admit, I still mess up. I still complain sometimes. I still get distracted when I should be listening. I still forget names. But even catching myself in those moments is growth. Even saying, right, let me slow down and tune in here is a step toward being the kind of person I want to be. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway of all. This book isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. About realizing, oh yeah, other people are living full, rich, complicated lives just like mine. And if I can step outside of myself long enough to notice, to care, to appreciate, then maybe I'm not just making friends or influencing people. Maybe I'm actually building a kinder little corner of the world. So as you go about your day, whether you're at work, at home, in line for coffee, or just scrolling through your phone, maybe try one of Carnegie's little experiments. Ask someone a genuine question and really listen to the answer. Or find one specific thing to sincerely appreciate about someone and actually say it out loud. Or just remember a name and use it. They're small acts, but they ripple. And who knows, you might be surprised by how much warmth bounces back to you. And, yeah, that's it, my friends. That's how to win friends and influence people. Or at least the heart of it. A book that's almost a century old and still whispering truths we desperately need in a world that sometimes feels like it's forgotten how to slow down and connect. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, for letting me ramble and laugh and share these ideas with you. I hope something in here sparked a thought or maybe gave you a nudge to try something new in your own relationships. I'll wrap it up here. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, sometimes the smallest gestures carry the biggest weight. This has been Lit Talk with Lisa. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.